Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey into the next decade. This is George Friedman's vision, the geopolitical strategist. We've got a stack of his book excerpts here.
Right.
And our mission really is to distill the most impactful nuggets, give you a shortcut to, really understanding his vision for the coming years.
Indeed. And Friedman's work it often really upends conventional wisdom, doesn't it? About global power, leadership, even how economic crises work.
Yeah.
He presents this starkly pragmatic, sometimes, frankly, unsettling view of how nations, particularly the U.S., are likely to navigate the future.
Okay, let's dive in then. Our exploration is going to focus on, I think, three core ideas.
Yeah.
First, we'll grapple with America's role as this unintended empire and the unique kind of leadership Friedman thinks it demands.
Right. The leadership piece is key.
Second, we'll connect past economic shocks like 2008 to the landscape of the next decade.
How it sets the stage.
Exactly. And finally, we'll do a kind of strategic tour, look at critical regional power dynamics, Middle East, Europe, Asia, even our own hemisphere.
Right.
Before wrapping up with a look at future tech and demographics.
And what's so compelling about Friedman's approach, I think, is how he synthesizes everything, history, geography, economics, to predict not just what might happen, but what he believes will happen, often regardless of our ideals or intentions,
Right. It's deterministic almost.
It's a powerful framework for understanding the sort of underlying truths of global power.
Okay, let's begin with a cornerstone of Friedman's argument. His assertion that the American president is, well, basically the most important political leader on earth.
Yeah, that's a big claim.
What makes him say that? And what does it imply, for the U.S. and for us globally?
Well, the central fact, as Friedman sees it, is pretty simple. The United States is the singular global military power. Period. And its economy is more than 3 times the size of the next largest sovereign economy.
3 times, wow.
Yeah. So this gives the U.S. this disproportionate power relative to its population.
Okay.
Think of it like Britain back in 1910, right? Their global reach was inescapable then.
Right. A similar kind of pivot point.
Exactly. And this isn't a role the U.S. actively sought out, he argues. It's more of an unintended empire.
Unintended?
Yeah, it sort of solidified after World War II and then became really undeniable after the Soviet collapse in '91.
So does that mean George Washington's famous farewell address, warning against entangling alliances, is that just obsolete now? Impossible.
Precisely. Friedman contends that a nation generating, 25% of the world's wealth is, well, by definition, entangled. You can't not be.
Okay.
The U.S. economy acts like a whirlpool, drawing everything into its vortex, affecting billions of lives globally.
Right.
And this immense power, while it offers advantages, it also naturally engenders hostility. That's his phrase.
Naturally engenders hostility.
Yeah. He even points to things like the global celebrations for Obama's election in 2008 or his Nobel Peace Prize.
Right, I remember that.
He sees those as sort of unconscious acknowledgments of this imperial role, like a global recognition of the American president's unique impact.
Okay, this leads us to one of Friedman's most provocative arguments. He says, to manage this unrivaled power that is oblivious, the next decade demands a shift.
A shift.
From willful ignorance of reality to its acceptance. And this sets the stage for his really controversial idea of the Machiavellian president. What exactly does he mean by that label?
Well, Friedman raises a really profound question here. Can a leader actually be good in the conventional moral sense while governing an empire? He argues political life is this constant tension, this conflict between the limit of good intentions and the necessity of power.
Okay.
And he quotes Machiavelli directly, suggesting a prince must learn how not to be good and to use this knowledge or not to use it according to necessity.
So it's about effectiveness over conventional morality.
For Friedman, yeah. The president's virtue isn't necessarily personal morality in the everyday sense, but this cunning ability to protect the republic in a world where, frankly, others aren't playing by those same rules.
Can you give us some examples, historical ones he uses to back this up? It's a pretty striking claim about American history.
Sure. Abraham Lincoln, for instance. Preserved the Union, abolished slavery.
Right, the great emancipator.
Yes. But through means that included deception, trampling civil liberties. He famously suspended habeas corpus, the right against unlawful detention.
To keep border states loyal.
Exactly. Then there's Franklin Roosevelt. Friedman points out he secretly aided the French and British before WWII, violating U.S. neutrality acts.
Because he saw a bigger threat.
He believed the survival of democracy itself was at stake. And Ronald Reagan pursuing the destruction of the Soviet Union, the evil empire, through ramping up the arms race and some pretty elaborate, even devious means, like the Iran-Contra affair.
Right. Selling arms to Iran, funneling profits.
To Nicaraguan insurgents, yeah. Friedman sees these actions, despite all their moral complexities, as ultimately serving a necessary national purpose. They were acting within the harsh realities of power.
So for Friedman, a president's job isn't to be some kind of philosopher king.
No.
But more a master of illusion, capable of convincing the public while pursuing actions that might challenge our usual ideas of political morality.
Exactly. It's a challenging perspective, really forces you to rethink what good leadership means in this context.
Okay, so moving from presidential strategy, let's connect this to the economic realities Friedman sees coming. How did the 2008 financial crisis, which we often think of as purely economic, how did that actually reshape global power dynamics for the next decade, according to Friedman?
Well, first, Friedman reminds us that these booms and busts aren't really new. They're a consistent pattern in modern capitalism.
Right, we've seen them before.
Yeah, he points to the dot-com crash around 2000, the savings and loan crisis back in the 80s, clear precedents. He cautions against seeing 2008 as some unique, unprecedented catastrophe.
Okay.
I mean, the U.S. GDP fall, 4.1%, was significant, sure, but nowhere near the Great Depression's almost 50% drop.
That's a useful perspective. And what's particularly insightful is how he links these cycles back to the role of the state.
Yes. He argues the state frequently intervenes in these cycles, often with unintended consequences.
Like how?
Well, post 9/11, for example, the Federal Reserve kept money cheap, really cheap.
Right, low interest rates.
Effectively financing the war on terror without immediate tax hikes. And this, combined with government encouragement for homeownership, inflated the housing bubble and fueled all those subprime loans.
Okay, I see the connection.
So when defaults started mounting, those prices that everyone counted on to keep going up, they plummeted.
And that triggered the global collapse.
Exactly, because these bundled mortgages, these toxic assets, were sold worldwide. They ended up affecting banks from Austria to Italy, who had, in turn, made euro-denominated loans to homeowners in Eastern Europe who were kind of speculating on currency markets. It was truly global.
So, yeah, the ripple effect wasn't just Wall Street. It hit people everywhere. From Eastern Europe to, as he mentioned, shrimp farmers in the Mekong Delta.
Absolutely.
But what was the long-term impact on the balance of global power?
Friedman contends the most profound effect of 2008 wasn't purely economic. It was geopolitical and political.
How so?
It fundamentally blurred the lines between corporations and the state. It significantly increased state power globally, especially in places where the market had really dominated, like the U.S.
So a reassertion of the state.
Yeah, a big one. This shift reinforced national sovereignty and, he predicts, is going to drive increasing economic nationalism in the coming decade.
He also brings up that crucial psychological element, doesn't he?
Yeah.
How leaders like Roosevelt and Reagan managed crises by cultivating this sense that something was being done, even if their specific policies weren't the whole solution.
Exactly. Both understood that fundamentally an economic crisis threatens political stability. That's the real danger.
Right. Confidence is key.
So they rebalanced power between financial and political elites. Roosevelt expanded government in the 30s. Reagan contracted it in the 80s. But both provided this crucial sense of decisive action, managing expectations, managing illusions almost.
That master of illusion idea again.
It's vital for a president, especially when the real threat is political instability and losing public trust.
Okay, now let's take that global tour, region by region. Friedman's core strategic argument for the U.S. in the next decade. It's a return to a kind of balanced global strategy.
Balanced, yeah, like ancient Rome or 19th century Britain, he says.
Maintaining dominance by essentially playing regional powers against each other, securing broader interests without always jumping in directly.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Which, raises the question, how does this apply to today's hotspots? Let's start with the Middle East and terrorism. Friedman asserts that the U.S.'s post-9/11 obsession with terrorism, his word, led to a disoriented strategy.
Disoriented how?
Pursuing an unattainable strategic goal, the total elimination of the threat. He sees it as the semantic and strategic confusion. It made it impossible to clearly define who the enemy was or what winning even looked like.
And he characterizes the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq Not as nation building, but more as spoiling attacks.
Right. Aimed at disrupting al-Qaeda, creating chaos, maybe, but not achieving sustainable strategic objectives, and ultimately exhausting American resources in the process.
Creating chaos is a short-term tactic, not a long-term strategy.
That's
his line, right?
Exactly. And he argues terrorism, even the nightmare scenario of nuclear terrorism, isn't truly an existential threat to a nation of 300 million people.
That's a controversial take.
It is, but his point is focusing all resources on it creates a strategic imbalance. It opens up windows of opportunity for other enemies. He points out the actual material damage of 9/11, while horrific, was minimal compared to the perceived threat level.
So the challenge is
to redefine U.S. interests in the Islamic world, rationally, while skillfully managing public perception back home.
Okay. What about the U.S.-Israel relationship? He calls that the most complex international relationship.
Yeah, and he argues the deep ties were historically strategic. Primarily, they were used to contain Soviet influence by restricting pro-Soviet regimes, like Egypt and Syria, from about 1967 to 1991.
But since the Cold War ended.
Right. Since 1991, he says, the basis of the relationship has been much less clear. Israel is now strategically secure, a dominant power in its neighborhood, strong economy.
So the aid isn't as crucial.
He suggests U.S. aid, which is about 1.4% of Israel's GDP, is now marginal in importance financially. It signals commitment, sure, but it's not make or break.
So what's his recommendation?
While saying no democratic ally is being abandoned, Friedman posits the U.S. should strategically draw back from Israel somewhat.
Draw back? To what end?
To rebalance the region, foster closer ties with key Arab states. It's a move he believes Israel ultimately could endure. It's about broader U.S. strategic interests.
Okay, shifting gears to Eurasia. Friedman issues a pretty stark warning here. Russia's reemergence, potentially aligning with Germany, he calls that the most significant threat in the decade.
Yeah, that's a big one. And he frames it historically.
How so?
The historical goal, he explains, for powers like the U.S. and Britain has always been to prevent the unification of Eurasia, specifically separating the technological sophistication of Europe from the natural resources and manpower of Russia.
Keep them apart.
Keep them apart. And he points out the 2008 crisis exposed the EU's weaknesses and really highlighted Germany's dependence on Russian natural gas, like nearly half its needs.
So how does the U.S. counter that potential alignment?
He suggests the U.S. must actively block an accommodation between Germany and Russia. And the primary tool for that? Poland. Cultivating a new, strong relationship with Poland, because Poland sits strategically right between them. It acts as the geographic monkey wrench, he calls it.
The geographic monkey wrench. Physically and politically disrupting any attempt at a direct land-based alliance.
Exactly. Poland, the historical bone in the throat for both Germany and Russia.
Right.
And for Poland, given its history, its hypersensitivity to betrayal from past wars, a really strong, unhedged commitment from the U.S. is crucial. Otherwise, they might feel forced to accommodate their powerful neighbors.
Makes sense.
He also highlights Turkey, its historical rivalry with Russia, its strategic position in the Balkans, the Caucasus, also crucial for American interests.
And he even suggests pulling back from Georgia.
Yeah, strategically withdraw support from Georgia. He sees it as a liability, actually. Sacrificing it, potentially, to gain concessions from Russia and avoid undermining this new Polish coalition psychologically. It's that kind of intricate, detailed, almost cold calculation of imperial strategy.
Wow. Okay. And what of the Western Pacific? We hear so much about China's rise. What's Friedman's take?
Friedman argues the U.S. strategy there needs to be one of delay and deflect.
Delay and deflect. Why?
He emphasizes China's deep internal divisions. You've got this prosperous coastal elite, maybe 60 million people, versus 1 billion impoverished citizens in the interior earning less than maybe $1,000, $2,000 a year. And China's critical reliance on exports to maintain social stability.
So he sees vulnerabilities.
Big time. He predicts a slowdown in China's economic miracle, forcing Beijing to focus primarily on internal security, on holding the country together. And Japan, he adds, despite being passive for years, will also become more assertive as its own economy restructures.
So the U.S. strategy is basically managing these two Asian giants without direct confrontation if possible.
Pretty much. The U.S. needs to ensure China doesn't splinter, maybe even by facilitating its exports to the U.S., paradoxically.
To relieve internal pressure.
Yeah, to relieve pressure on China, which counterintuitively helps constrain Japan by keeping China stable and focused inward. But at the same time, the U.S. needs to keep relations with Japan cordial, keep them reliant on the U.S. for sea lane security.
Complex balancing act.
Very. And he also flags Australia and Singapore as vital partners for projecting U.S. naval power in that region.
Okay, let's turn briefly to our own hemisphere. Friedman kind of dismisses Venezuela as a serious threat.
Yeah, despite the rhetoric, he says they pose no real threat. Their oil exports are tied to the U.S. market, and their geography makes them pretty isolated.
But what about Cuba and Mexico? They're right on the doorstep.
Cuba, he says, holds singular importance. Why? Its singularly strategic location near critical U.S. waterways in the Caribbean.
So location, location, location.
Exactly. Friedman suggests the U.S. should pursue a rational, preemptive policy to bring Cuba back into the U.S. sphere of influence before some other global competitor, think China, maybe could establish a base there.
And he's very clear this isn't about democracy promotion.
Explicitly. He says it has nothing to do with human rights or regime change. It's purely strategic calculation.
And Mexico. The twin problems, immigration and drugs, that dominate so much of our domestic politics.
Friedman's take is pretty blunt here, too. He asserts that the American economic system's appetite drives both issues.
The demand side.
Yes. The demand for low-cost labor drives immigration. The demand for drugs drives the drug trade. He argues simple solutions like national ID cards or drug legalization are politically impossible.
Why impossible?
Because of internal ideological divides in the U.S. or conflicting interests, particularly the segment of the economy that benefits from that low-cost labor.
So what's the rational strategy then, according to him?
Hypocrisy, he says, appearing to act tough on both fronts while ensuring that efforts ultimately fail because the underlying demand remains.
Wow, that's cynical.
It is. And he warns direct intervention in Mexico would be disastrous. It could easily conflate the drug cartels with Mexican nationalism and create a much deeper, unwinnable conflict.
Okay. Finally, his stance on Africa is also quite stark. A place to leave alone. What's the reasoning there?
Friedman basically argues Africa lacks the coherent nation-states needed for the kind of balance of power strategy the U.S. employs elsewhere.
The borders aren't organic.
Right. He sees the current borders as colonial holdovers, creating inherent instability and fueling internal conflicts. And he believes, true, nations are born in conflict, often over generations. That process hasn't fully played out.
So no vital U.S. interest.
He suggests the U.S. has no overwhelming interest in Africa, beyond specific resources, like oil in certain places, or maybe containing Islamist influence sometimes. Past Cold War involvement, he says, was purely about blocking the Soviets.
So strategic indifference.
Essentially, it allows the U.S. to conserve resources. Though he does note corporations can still pursue commercial deals for minerals or agriculture that's separate from high-level state strategy.
Okay, let's shift focus now to a different kind of challenge Friedman outlines. The intersection of technology and demographics.
Right.
He paints this picture of an aging global population, especially in the developed world, rising healthcare costs, and, interestingly, a kind of lull in truly disruptive innovation.
Yeah, the massive baby boom generation is entering retirement now or already there. That creates this unprecedented economic burden, huge demands for healthcare, end-of-life care.
A demographic wave hitting the shore.
Exactly. And simultaneously, Friedman suggests that the breakthrough technologies to solve emerging and already pressing needs, well, they're going to be in short supply this decade.
Why is that?
Financial crises, like 2008, tend to reduce capital available for really risky long-term ventures. And even military-driven innovation, which historically gave us things like radar, the internet, microchips. That's lagging, he argues, partly because the focus has been on current light infantry wars in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, not big fundamental R&D pushes.
So are we stuck in an extrapolative and incremental state with tech rather than a truly transformative one? Is that his view?
Precisely. That's his term. He sees current tech advances, social networking, mobile apps, that sort of thing, as more like rearranging the furniture rather than building a new structure.
Okay. Interesting analogy.
The next really active phase, he thinks things like robotics for elder care maybe requires fundamental breakthroughs in microprocessors, battery technology, stuff that needs massive computing power, enhanced mobility.
Things that aren't quite there yet.
Right. They're not quite ready for prime time. He predicts those truly transformative innovations won't really emerge until well into the 2020s.
Okay. And what are the energy challenge? This feels like a constant debate.
Yeah.
What's Friedman's perhaps unwelcome prognosis for the next decade's energy landscape?
He's very direct, yeah. Unwelcome is probably right for some. He says energy use is going to continue to surge, especially as the developing world prioritizes economic growth over cutting back.
So international climate agreements.
He points out that global initiatives like Copenhagen, Kyoto, they failed. Why? Because leaders couldn't actually persuade their own publics to accept the significant cuts in standard of living that genuine energy reform would demand.
So for this decade, what are the choices?
He says our choices are pretty pedestrian, primarily coal and natural gas.
Coal and gas.
Yeah. And he specifically highlights hydraulic fracking as a way to dramatically increase domestic U.S. natural gas supplies.
Which reduces reliance on imported oil.
And the associated geopolitical risks, the risk of war over energy supplies.
But that choice, coal and natural gas, especially fracking, it comes with its own huge set of environmental concerns and political battles, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And Friedman acknowledges that. The president, he argues, has to choose the right balance between coal and gas, and then basically tell the people that these are the only choices. Frame it honestly, even within the context of global warming concerns.
A difficult message.
Very. And for long-term energy solutions, he says we need radical ideas like space-based solar power.
Space-based solar, wow.
Yeah. And he suggests initial development for that kind of thing will likely have to come from the Department of Defense because the state is often better positioned to fund that really long-term basic research than the private market, which needs quicker returns.
This has been a really whirlwind deep dive into Friedman's The Next Decade. And it's clear he offers a stark, pragmatic view of the world.
Very stark.
He asserts that the U.S. cannot simply abandon its imperial status, not with its 25% share of the world economy. Trying to do so would have breathtakingly severe consequences.
Right. It's a heavy responsibility, he argues, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not.
And ultimately, it seemed to come down to reconciling moral principles with the exercise of power.
Exactly. He argues the comforting idea that nobody gets hurt in geopolitics is just unrealistic. Leaders have to make difficult decisions about who gets hurt and when.
Echoing those historical compromises like Lincoln supporting slavery in Kentucky temporarily to win the bigger prize, the Civil War.
Precisely. For Friedman, a Machiavellian president, someone who understands power's harsh realities but still has a core moral commitment to the republic, is the only practical bulwark for the nation in this dangerous world.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, looking ahead? Friedman's final, quite provocative thought is, the United States has grown up. Its public must too.
Yeah. He's suggesting that we, the public, need to mature in our understanding of global power and responsibility. We need to be aware that the choices made in the next decade, choices that might seem morally ambiguous or contradictory, will profoundly affect the long-term outcome. And that sometimes, maybe often, a president has to manage illusions, manage perceptions to guide the nation through this incredibly complex, often hostile world.
The alternative being a kind of naive
The
idealism.
kind of naive idealism that he implies the hard realities of global power simply won't tolerate. It could lead to worse outcomes.
What stands out to you from this deep dive into Friedman's The Next Decade? It certainly provides a lot to chew on as we look to the future, doesn't it?
It really does.
Thanks for joining us.